Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. I am so excited to introduce our featured leader today, Matt Maloney. He's the Director of Applied AI and Data Science at City of Hope. Matt, it's so nice to have you today. How are you doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here today.
Wonderful. It would be great if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and something you like to do for fun.
Sure. So what do I do? I'm a director, as Libby said, of data science at City of Hope. City of Hope is a large cancer treatment and research organization, and has been recognized as one of the nation's top hospitals for cancer care. We have hospitals in a few locations, so Los Angeles, Orange County, Phoenix, Atlanta, and Chicago. And I've been working as a data scientist and now in a leadership position there for about 5 years. Um, my team specifically focuses on, building data solutions for that are more operations focused as opposed to research focused. There's a separate group we do work closely with that supports research, but I'd be focused on things like, um, for example, helping with predicting claim denials or helping manage something for philanthropy and help them find a solution. So that's a little bit about what I do professionally. Like I said, I've been in healthcare now for about 5 years at City of Hope, and before that, University of Utah Health System. But have a background in finance and econ before that. Uh, Something I do for fun. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, with my wife and two small children. And whenever I can, I like to get outside. So climbing, hiking, mountain biking, snowboarding. I really find that stuff helps me recharge, and I love being just outside whenever I can be. It's a beautiful day here with a lot of snow on the ground, actually. So
I was
yeah,
just going to ask, did you get snow? Because my friends in Illinois and Wisconsin certainly did. This
yeah,
past week has
we
been wild.
yeah we got I don't know, maybe 6 inches yesterday, and it's stuck
Nice.
around because it's been cold. So
Yeah. Well,
it's
you live in
good.
a great place to get outside. Fort Collins is fun and it's a college town, so it's nice and energetic. Well, I already saw somebody ask in the chat a little bit more about City of Hope would be great. So if you could talk a little bit more about what City of Hope does and what the data science function helps with, the kind of problems that you solve. If you could go in a little bit more depth there, that might give us some context.
Sure. Yeah. So the the function of, well, starting with City of Hope. City of Hope is uh, first and foremost cancer research and treatment. So we're not doing any clinical care that is not related to cancer. And then on the research side, cancer is the focus as well. And so, you know, what does that cover? That covers, fundamental research on the research side. It's, you know, all kinds of cancer care for every type of patient and disease type. It's also clinical trials, right? Making sure that we're matching patients with the right clinical trials and getting them enrolled in the best care possible. And I think one of the core missions of the organization is not just providing world-class cancer care, but it's making it as accessible as possible to as many people, right? So it's not just getting the highest quality treatment, but also making it broadly accessible. So what is the data science role at City of Hope? So data science is a kind of broad term that I know the role varies by organization, even across healthcare organizations. Um, you'll have different data science teams doing different things. So um, we have a kind of centralized group of data scientists in kind of this larger applied AI and data science department. And we're kind of split into two teams. The first team is focused on research applications. So they tend to work very closely with the academic research teams at City of Hope. And then sorry, I got distracted by the chat for a second. And then my team is really focused on development of solutions for our internal operational needs. So that could be on the clinical side. You can think of something like, we have a proprietary model for predicting or assessing sepsis risk for patients who have received bone marrow transplants. So that would be more like what we would call like clinical operations. We're trying to support an operational workflow with a product we developed and manage. And then more on the business side, my team is also supporting requests around revenue cycles. So this may be, can we have a model that will help us optimize our billing? One of the earliest projects I work on and still support is a forecasting system for our finance team. And trying to think of new applications in other areas. Another example is recently we've been tasked with supporting our philanthropy team with doing more using some LLM technology to help better understand and match gifts with research projects. So those are like a few examples I think that can kind of create a vision of what our team is doing. Now you might be hearing in this that the team I'm in is focused a lot on sort of production solutions that tend to come in the form of like software or something we would put into production that would run either as sort of an endpoint for inference from a model, or it might be something that we would set up as like a daily cron job to deliver productions to some people in a workflow somewhere. Or in the case of the clinical models, signal an alert in one of our EHR systems, right? When, for example, a model has flagged that a patient is at risk for sepsis, for example. And my team is not as focused on sort of more of like reporting or what might be thought of in some organizations as sort of like analytics and data visualization. We do some of that, but not as much. Especially recently, it's been more focused on taking a predictive model or an LLM solution and putting it into production. I
Matt,
hope
I
that helps a
think
little bit.
I
Yeah,
just
it
heard
does.
you say something about the EHR, and I think that's electronic health record. But I remember our team saying something about how you were integrating Posit with Epic, your EHR. And I thought that would be so cool to be able to share with other healthcare uh, people on the call as well. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about how you're doing that?
And what Epic
Sure.
is, first of
Yeah,
all.
and what ep
Yeah,
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 it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
EHR, electronic health record, right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Epic is, I'm sure many of you may be familiar with it, but it's the largest organization or largest vendor for electronic medical record software, right? So when you go to visit your physician or whatever, and you see them working on their computer, there's a good chance that that's the Epic system they're working in, right? So a lot of the data my team works with is data that originates in the Epic system. That's where information about patient gets put in, and that's also importantly where a lot of the workflows are, not just for providers. care providers, physicians, nurses, et cetera, but also more and more some of our operational staff, because Epic doesn't just handle, the medical record side of things for us, but also handles a lot of the billing related work and processes. So we also have what we call our revenue cycle staff working in that environment and with that information. And so one of the requests that was coming up is to, we would have standalone applications. A lot of them would be living in our Posit Connect instance. And so, for example, this is a good motivating example. We have a tool that helps our coding team. So this is the team that, a visit happens and then, basically it's recorded what treatments and procedures and diagnoses the patients had. And then that moves to then into not only the billing process, but also, just to make sure that we have a rigorous and compliant medical record for the patient. So there's a team that reviews this documentation, and we have a tool that assists them with that documentation. And it was living in Posit Connect. And one of their requests is we do all our workflows in Epic. This would be a lot lower friction for us if we could embed it. And Epic does have a capability set of integrating software in a few different ways, right? If you're a software vendor that's trying to, say, develop something that you would want to be available in the marketplace, right, as like a really premier like software solution for other healthcare systems, you would use like a Smart on Fire framework. You would register as an app developer. But for a lot of our cases, we were hoping there might be a sort of a kind of middle ground to becoming full-blown software engineers. And so we've been working with the Posit team on nesting our applications in Epic and passing a few parameters using what they call setting it up as they call it an FDI record, if anyone cares. I don't actually even know what that acronym means. Maybe somebody else here knows. But you set up this record in their system of where you want this application to live. And then we've been working on some of the details of making sure that the integration goes smoothly. And we're still, we still haven't completed that process, but we're getting pretty close. And it's very promising because for us, it's a really rapid way to take something we've developed as data scientists and move it into their preferred environment for their workflows without necessarily having to engage with our software engineering team. Or get outside of the scope of where we really feel comfortable. So that's what we've been doing as far as integrating Posit applications hosted on Posit Connect with our EHR, electronic health record system.
That is awesome. So what I'm hearing is, and we're going to hop to the slide of questions in just 1 second. What I'm hearing is you have end users who are medical coders who are getting to stay in their system, but the information is getting to pass to the applications that your data science team is building so that they don't have to like use a Shiny app if they're not familiar with it. They can use the applications that they're used to using.
Yes, well, the Shiny app is nested there, but they don't have to, for example, open a separate window or type in whatever arguments are needed manually, right? Some of that information
Right.
can be passed, which it's not. For some workflows, it's more critical than others. The coding staff that works with us are very, they're very, they're really, really good, great partners. And so this is sort of a nice to have for them. But on some of our other projects where our customers are providers, where their workflows and time is very, very valuable.
Right. And providers being
We're
like doctors and clinicians, right? Yeah.
yes. There may be a little bit of jargon. Yeah, we're talking
Mhm.
about physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and the goal here is to eventually take some of the work we're doing that's more oriented towards providers. And we've already integrated some of our provider-facing work through a different EHR integration method, which is like they call it best practice advisory alerts. So we do have other ways of integrating some of our work into the EHR system, but this would be another option for us if we can, get it to where we want it to be
Very
for
cool.
for provider workflows. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear in the chat from everybody if there are things that you could think of that would be cool to integrate into the applications that you build as a data scientist or a data analyst or a data person in general. Um, because that's something that I've never even thought of before until I met Matt and he said that they were integrating it. I'm like, I didn't think that you could do that. So I'm curious if there are any other use cases that you can think of. I'll be interested to go back through the chat later and look at them. But we have so many questions in Slido. Let's get to Slido questions. We might hop around in topics, but I would love to start with Noor's question because your job title has AI on it, and we are in an AI era, and Noor has an AI question. Would you like to unmute and ask that one, Noor?
Sure. Hello. I apologize for my camera being off kilter-ish. There, that's better. Hi, Matt. Nice to meet you. So, uh, just for warning, I am more on the, I think they call it bearish side of AI, also known as fancy ML, but with the aggressive push to adopt what people call AI into their workflows, how do you handle the needs of privacy like PHI, PII, and so forth? I know you're more on the, I think you mentioned administrative side as opposed to research side, but there's still like privacy concerns and billing and so forth. How exactly are you handling that, or how are you handling that? Or you're just like, no, we're not dealing with AI right now because we have a nice steady workflow and so forth.
Sure, that's a great question. So we've done there are a couple of things that are really important. The first is we have set up at City Hope a really strong AI governance framework and committee so that every use of AI goes through a rigorous review process, where a lot of different concerns from privacy, HIPAA compliance to, various ethics considerations are reviewed. The second thing is we've worked really closely with Microsoft to make sure that we're using we're almost exclusively using OpenAI at this point because of their partnership with Microsoft and because of our existing partnership with Microsoft, so that they've been able to ensure that none of our information that's being passed to any endpoints from an outside provider are any of that data can be misused or is not compliant with our regulatory requirements.
Very, very cool. Thank you, Noor, for the great question. I have another question here from Arsenis that would be great to ask. Arsenis, are you available to ask that one live?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Libby.
There he is. Hey, Arsenis. I didn't
Yeah.
see your camera on, so I wasn't sure.
Oh, it is on.
You're on. It's on now.
Oh, okay, cool. Um, hey, Matt, thank you so much for chatting with us today. My question is a little bit about your role, and you kind of described AI at City of Hope, or not AI, but data science at City of Hope. It seems you all seem to have a pretty broad scope in terms of the types of things you all do, from accounting and finance to research to clinical things. And so I'm wondering, how is it that you manage to kind of try to stay abreast of the technical elements of all of those different things, because they are quite different? How do you handle all that in discussions with your various teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's one of the most, if not the most challenging thing about the job right now, because it seems like the um, scope of our role is growing very quickly, right? And we're at larger organizations. I think that a lot of specialization has already happened, right? You have your data scientist, you have your AI engineer, you have your ML ops person, right? And so one of the biggest challenges for me as a leader at this sort of mid-sized organization is making sure that we're able to not get overwhelmed as the scope of what might be under the data science umbrella or within the scope of our department grows, right? Because it used to be, know some stats and a little bit of ML, and then it grew, and now you've got to know DevOps, and now you've got to know LLM frameworks. And the answer is I don't really have an answer because this is one of the most challenging things about my job. So I'll talk to you a couple of things we're doing to try to address this. One is we are moving towards a little greater specialization. We're moving. We haven't done a round of hiring in a few years, but we're moving into one right now where we're going to be identifying more specialized ML engineering and AI engineering roles. So I can have, a data scientist on my team who's, very has a lot of expertise in but it has expertise in a certain area of our data resources. Maybe has a really strong science background or statistics background, but doesn't have an AI engineering background. Now we can have somebody to complement this person's skill set rather than when I get an intake request, I got to just, use who I have. So that's one thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is we're taking on a little bit more of a mature product management framework so that we can make sure whenever possible, we are able to partner with other teams for data engineering, in some cases UI, UX development, and DevOps. So we're not getting bogged down in something like, deploying our cloud infrastructure or something like that for a project where it's not an efficient use of our team's time. So those are really the two things, is we are moving towards greater role specialization. Also, I should say, carving out time for learning. Everyone on my team, great lifelong learners, extremely capable learners. Almost all of them have PhDs, but I got to give them the time, right, to take the course or study to bring up their skills because the skills and tools are constantly changing. So that's one thing is specialization of roles, kind of this upskilling idea. And then the second thing is taking a lot more seriously finding partners and making sure we have good partners in the organization, and we're delegating where we can, right? Like if somebody on the team wants to do a little bit of data engineering, but we have a data engineer available to us, I'm not as likely to kind of just permit that as I would have been, in the past. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
I think it does. And there's an anonymous question that is a little bit of a follow-up on this. And it's, at what point do you hand off your work to the software engineering team? I think you touched on that a little bit. There's a lot of AI/data science folks can do, especially with things like Posit Connect. But at some point, those tools get handed off to the production teams, right?
Well,
That's the end of the
yes.
question.
And, I think, when do we hand it off? This is a good question. This is another thing that's still something I'm figuring out. I can sit here
Yeah.
and say
And some
I
data
figured
science
it all
teams
out,
like
but
don't hand it off at all. They're like, yeah, we don't give it to IT or anybody. We handle it. But a lot of them do.
we are in IT. So the answer to that,
Oh,
I
okay.
think, is usually, yeah, that's another thing that's a little different
You
about
sit
our
in IT.
organization. Yeah, we sit in IT, which is I don't actually know what uh, might be the norm across the industry, to be in IT versus outside of IT for these roles. I think it varies, but we're within IT. Um, and I think really where we are right now is sort of we hand it off when like a product manager or the customer says that whatever we've deployed in Posit Connect, for example, is not good enough. So I draw the boundary on like, for a lot of the things we're doing, what we're able to deploy in say Posit Connect is sufficient, or delivering a report, on a cron schedule is sufficient. But really, the answer to that is guided by either our customers in the organization or the product team when they're like, look, this we need a better UI UX, we need better performance as far as latency, something like that is where we would be like, okay, we're going to pass this. We're going to pass this on to the software engineering team, and sometimes it's sort of a collaborative hybrid approach. Like, we have a project now where we've got some sort of like services deployed as fast APIs on Posit Connect, and we were operating the UI UX, and the customers were kind of like, we kind of want a little better UI than I think what you can offer. And instead of like doubling down and letting my team work on that more, I said, you know what, this is time to hand it off. So they're going to start working on building the UI, and they may end up migrating those APIs as well. I'm not sure, but kind of just depends on when we decide we've met the customer's needs.
All right, cool. Well, we're getting lots and lots and lots of feedback in the chat about being inside or outside of IT. And I wanted to call out Eric Nance's hot take here, which is if you follow best practices with software engineering and their data science teams, you may not need to hand things off. It's a common misconception to this day that something can be prototyped in Shiny or general artifacts on Posit Connect, but they absolutely can stand the test of scaling and optimal UX. Here, here. I think that that's great. I don't always have the bandwidth in my brain to become a pseudo software engineer and develop all those software engineering best practices with all of the like other stuff, stats and ML and stuff that I already have in my brain. But if you can do it, or just work really closely with them to understand what they need as best practices, it can be great. All right, fantastic questions from everybody, including our anonymous asker. Thank you so much for asking that. Nicolay, I saw that you had a question and I wanted to call you in if you are still here to ask that live. Are you available? There you are. Hey, Nicolay. I've
Yeah,
highlighted it
hey, good
in
afternoon. Can you guys
Slido.
hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm in a conference room with my team here. We're all very excited to see another fellow healthcare data scientist. So we all work at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, also in Epic.
Oh,
So
awesome.
yeah,
Hi,
so I have a
team.
lot
Nice to meet you.
of yeah, no, this is it's very interesting how this is almost a mirror image of how we are in some ways. So I have a lot of technical questions around the integration, but I'm going to save that if we can maybe get some time offline.
Oh yeah, we'll
For kind of
connect you
general,
later.
a general question I have though is, I mean, there's a lot of generative AI. Matt, you said, it seems like a lot of your work is split between advanced analytics and then some. You mentioned sepsis prediction. How much has development that involves LLMs and generative AI like taken hold in your space? And what are some examples of use cases and applications you guys have developed that um, use generative AI?
Yeah, great question. So, really, in the last 2 years, the percentage of our work that has focused on applications of generative AI has really grown, right? It's a huge percentage of what we do now. And I think a lot of that is just driven by demand, but also, finding the right opportunities. And I think to give you a few examples of where we've had success, specific applications, and some of these are managed by my team. Some of these are managed more by the research team I was talking about. Some are collaborations, but kind of I'll go through a few examples of where we found success. Clinical documentation reviews and analysis is huge. So sometimes those are to support coders. Sometimes that's to support clinicians. A big one we've worked on at City of Hope is summarization of documentation for new patients that come in. So being able to take all the documents we get from external sources, right? And in some cases, doing the OCR, converting them, and then generating summaries for the providers. This is one of what we've kind of branded as our Hope LLM products, is new patient summarization. And so that's another example. Clinical trial matching and feasibility assessment has been a big one, right? Where we're able to take, say, a document that outlines the inclusion and exclusion criteria for a clinical trial, right? And sometimes those criteria are very complex, and it's sitting in, a text document, and then being able to in an automated way apply to an individual patient or a patient population. Are these criteria, inclusion and exclusion criteria met for, a given patient given all of the clinical documentation we have for them. So those are a few examples, and something we're moving into a little bit now is maybe looking some at payer documentation, so like payer contracts, things like that. That's something we haven't done a lot of yet, but we're looking towards doing in the next maybe 3 months or so. So that's just kind of a high level of some of the applications we're areas we're having success in. I don't know if you have follow-up questions, but I know it's kind of a lot because we're doing a lot of different things, but
That's
Uh,
exciting.
I do have one quick follow-up around some of these. Like a lot of these are things that vendors actually also provide. So, do you all use or does your team evaluate a lot of the things that Epic might be throwing your way for example, document summarization or their predictive models too?
yes. So that's a great question, and that's something that there's always this sort of difficult, sort of build versus buy decision that is complicated by how quickly the landscape is changing, right? So a lot of the things we've built, like some of the analysis of clinical documentation, when we started that work and rolled out our first version, it wasn't available from Epic yet, right? Some of the Epic generative AI solutions are just being rolled out now, right? And so moving forward, we're going to apply the same governance framework we have had for predictive models in the past, which is we don't want to build something ourselves that Epic has already solved, for example. So what we'll do is as part of the AI governance process I mentioned before, our first role is to sort of evaluate if that solution is sufficient for our needs. So is Epic's solution have adequate performance to meet our internal requirements for whatever this use case is, right? And so one of the roles of my team, um, especially those who are focused on the clinical side, is to do some validation work of those models. So it would be, and we've done this before. For example, I mentioned the sepsis model. Step one in that project was validate whatever the Epic model was at the time, see if it meets our requirements. If it doesn't, maybe we have a case for developing our own solution, and we revisit in a few years if they release a new version. And I think moving forward, as vendors like Epic roll out more and more of their own solutions, I think that this validation work is going to become a lot bigger part of our job. To be frank, I think it's going to be because I don't think we're at a place where we're comfortable, even if it's coming from Epic, just rolling it out with some kind of internal validation. So as they roll out more and more solutions, which is happening more rapidly, I think it's going to become a bigger part of our responsibility, and a bigger part of our role is going to be doing the validation work. And then, of course, developing where they're, whatever they have is not necessarily meeting the requirements for our specific organization. And, an area where this has come up in the past is just that we have a very specialized patient population. So sometimes our needs are a little different. So for example, I don't see us using a vendor solution for some of the work we're doing around clinical trials, for example, but because we have a lot of proprietary data, we have a specialized patient population. But for stuff around saying like drafting denial response letters or something for billing, that's something where I think we could probably validate it really quickly and be like, yeah, the vendor solution is totally sufficient for our needs.
Awesome. This conversation has been so great, and there are so many questions in Slido about the nuts and bolts of integration stuff. I know that you are working with Rachel on a sort of like spotlight, which might cover a little bit more of this, so people can look forward to that. If you are interested in follow-ups with Matt and you have fantastic questions about this integration stuff, feel free to send Rachel a DM here and leave her your email. We can connect to you and talk more about it. But I would like to ask an example of like the nuts and bolts questions that we're getting, because one of them was like, how, for example, does Epic pass an encounter number or a patient ID, something like that, to connect? Like, what does that connection look like?
Um, that that is something that might better be answered by one of the engineers that we are working with on this. My day to day is less hands-on, and um, I'm concerned I may not give an accurate answer on that
That
one.
is okay. That is
So,
totally okay.
so I think that's something where I'd like to get one of the engineers we're working with in the conversation, especially with such a large group. Um, because I think I have the answer, but I'm going to be cautious on this one. Yeah.
No worries. I appreciate the nuance that is going on behind the scenes with all of that. It's way above my head. Okay, let's hop over to Slido and chat a little bit more. I myself am getting distracted by the chat today. It is wild. Y'all are just so amazing in the chat.
I saw
There's
a
been,
question Brent had asked.
oh, perfect.
And I think, let's see, Brent, do you want to jump in here? I can ask you to unmute.
I just highlighted your question, Brent, so it popped to the top in Slido in case you don't remember.
No, I do, and thank you. I'm sorry
Awesome.
I missed the majority of the talk. I was busy in clinic. Anyway, as an end user, we don't have Epic, we have Cerner. However, I find it difficult to implement some of these machine learning models into a very good use case practice. I mean, the sepsis model does work out, but there are some ways that nurses and the end users record data that's not super helpful. And I apologize, there's construction going on.
We
It's
cannot
not
hear
super
it. Don't
helpful
worry.
where it's not, like, for example, the blood pressure recording is two separate recordings, but they're not mutually exclusive pieces of data. They actually go together and can provide important information. And so, how does your team handle these nuanced pieces of clinical information that might be overlooked by a machine learning model? Because that's where I kind of struggle sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me sit on that for a second. I think that the short answer is, um, you know, I we use a lot of different tools, and we spend a lot of time on data engineering and cleaning up the data. You were bringing up blood pressure information, and I had one of our PhD data scientists working for 6 months just cleaning up some of the data formatting, right? Sometimes you get different units of measurement if you're talking about dosages and things like that. And we still spend a ton of time with just old school, getting in the data, cleaning it up, working with data engineers. Because, I think at the essence of your question is a little bit of like garbage in, garbage out, right? And I am one of the things I'm very, I don't know, adamant about is we have a whole um, kind of suite of tools we work with. And um, almost all of the solutions we build, it's not just, you know, a generative AI model, just throw it on top of your data. It's basically a combination of a lot of different efforts and tools. A lot of the time that's, doing a lot of work on cleaning up the data. And not only just cleaning it up, but we work with a couple of physicians who give us feedback along the way. So one thing that I think is often overlooked is how much of a time commitment is required from some kind of subject matter expert, like a physician or a clinical documentation specialist, to help us through that process of cleaning up the data because we don't have the clinical expertise. So one of the things I try to do early on in a project is say, okay, this you all need a solution for your workflow. This is going to look like a partnership where we're going to have to work together, and we're going to need some of your time to validate, say, hey, have we cleaned up the labs data in a way that it's consistent with your understanding of what's clinically, relevant, right? And then, sometimes that's a much bigger part of the project than writing the code to make the predictions on top of those data sources. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I think that we take very, very seriously that whether we're talking about, a traditional predictive model or a generative AI solution, this is one, tool that's usually only a limited part of a complete solution. And one of the things is making sure that the data that goes in is of high quality. And unfortunately, there's no magic for that. That's still a time consuming process that requires time from us and requires time from the subject matter experts. And that's just the way it is. I think that, we could sit and say that AI is going to solve that problem, but no, there's still a ton of work to be done.
That's my experience as well in working with clinical data for different projects. Uh, do the administrators appreciate the time that it takes? Like the people who run the hospital or the facility at City of Hope include that into their budgetary aspects? Because there's another constraint that we run against, which is the healthcare administrator role and whether or not they recognize that as value added.
Yeah, um, that's another one I don't have an answer to because I think it's a universal challenge in healthcare. Um, and the only thing, I mean, how I'll speak to that is just we've gotten more mature, as I said, with at the beginning saying this is what's going to be required. And then if administrators can't design some way that, for example, the incentives, because I mean, let me see if this aligns with what you're saying, which is basically we have a situation where the organization wants an improvement in, say, how the physicians are documenting something like this, right? But that's going to require physicians to take time to work with us to validate, the results, potentially help with some of the helping us to understand the data, but then they're not given the time or any incentive structure to actually carve out that time. Is that kind of consistent with the problem you're talking about? Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I love this thinking about this stuff because my background is economics. That's what I did for grad school. Just kind of trained as an economist. So I'm always thinking about, are the incentives of the people who are needing to be helping us or using these tools aligned with the broader incentives of the organization? And if not, how do we align those incentives? And I am now being very assertive about having that conversation early. So this isn't about clinicians, but a recent example is I found out that some of the clinical documentation specialists who are supposed to be our SMEs for validating some of the work we were doing, they said, we have this system that tracks our time, and we don't have any like code to like log our time for this validation work. And so I immediately was like, well, that's a problem we have to solve before we do any more development work here, because that's an instance where like the overall organization wants this problem solved. You have users that are saying they can't log their time against this. We've got to resolve that problem before we can do any more development work, because otherwise the incentives are all not aligned.
Oh,
This is fantastic conversation.
I just wanted to add, it sounds like there's a group of people here where it would be really awesome to have us all in a small group conversation. And I was brainstorming about like, do I spin up a form real quick? But that wasn't going to happen. So if you all want to just like email me and say if you are interested, Rachel at posit.co, in being part of that, maybe I could help set something up for like early January or even in 2 weeks from now, depending on people's schedules to get together. So right now I'll just put the email in there if that's the best way.
Awesome. I think that sounds great. I hate to like shift us away from this. We have about 10 minutes left. So I would love to at least hop in and ask a little bit of a career focused question. Um, we had an anonymous question as well. And so I'm going to put these two kind of together because the anonymous question I think can be answered pretty quickly. It's, did I hear correctly that City of Hope has an academic division? And if so, what happens in that academic division? Could you share just a quick bit about that, and then we'll talk a little bit about career stuff?
Sure. Let me so the academic research that's happening at City of Hope, a lot of that happens with, I mean, there are a lot of providers who are kind of dual researchers and also providing clinical care, but then a lot of the research projects at City of Hope are happening within the Beckman Research Institute. So there's a standalone research institute focused on just academic research. And I do not work very closely with the Beckman Research Institute. Um, Within my department, again, there are sort of two groups. There's my group that's very focused on uh, clinical and business operations and building solutions for those types of problems. And then there's a research group that sits next to us that partners. It's sort of like IT, us and IT partnering with the Beckman Research Institute. And I just thought maybe it was a good idea to have the director for that group, Alec Wong. Maybe he could come into one of these meetups. Maybe I should recommend him as a guest because he has a lot of fascinating things to talk about on the use of generative AI and machine learning on the research side. You know, we're talking about fundamental research around cancer, but I'm not really the expert in that area. He is.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we like to ask everybody if they have a piece of career advice that they have really loved or has been really impactful for them. I don't know if there's something that you have on the top of your head or that you think about. I can't remember if I warned you in our pre-call, like, hey, I'm going to ask you a career advice question. Um, but yeah, I'd love to hear.
Let's see. I don't remember prepping for this, but I think my maybe it happened and I just forgot, but that's okay. So career advice. I think there's um, a lot of value in sort of finding an industry that you're interested in getting a foot in the door. You know, even if it's not in the ideal role, because, you know, as a data scientist, I think one thing that becomes really, really valuable is knowledge of a specific industry or, you know, domain knowledge of a specific industry or even domain knowledge around specifically the data that your organization has. And so there's a lot of room once you become like an expert or get your foot in the door in an organization for then defining your role within an organization. At least that's been my experience. I mean, I don't want to say this applies, you know, generally across the board because maybe some organizations um, have more rigorous role definitions than ours does or has. But you know, I've seen people come in and they find a problem they're interested in, really excel in it, and then all of a sudden, especially because it's a growing area, they've carved out like an entirely different like job definition and career path for themselves. And that hasn't just been my experience at City of Hope, but it's also been I remember my first job out of undergrad. This is going way back. Um, this was in 2010. Job market was still a little bit weak, and I got a job that was like um, at a small financial firm where I thought I was going to be doing a lot of administrative work. And I like in the first couple of months, you know, they said they had some problem with their spreadsheets or whatever. I learned VBA and, you know, all of a sudden I had a totally different job. And so I think, you know, again, this is me improvising a little bit because I didn't have time to sit and think very long about this
No, no,
question.
that's okay. It's an
but
off the cuff,
but
quick question. No worries.
but I think that's something that you know I don't exactly want to call it a backdoor, but it's organizations I found aren't the roles aren't as rigorously defined as it might look like from the outside when you see a job posting. And so if you get in the door and you have something you're really passionate about, I think there's often a lot of flexibility to shape your role.
Fantastic. And I think I would agree still in a lot of industries. Not everything is the same, you're right. But yeah, a lot still. Well, I wanted to hop over to see if we can just get one more Slido question in. Frank asked a question. Frank, if you're available to ask that live, if you're still here, I know some people have to drop at the half hour sometimes. Frank Kovacs.
Yep, I'm here.
Hey,
Uh,
Frank.
so from Still from last time. Quick thing. So I actually come from the engineering side of things, specifically the data engineering group. And my question was, let me just pull it up. My question specifically was because we have so many, I don't want to use the term vibe coding, but for lack of a better term, vibe coding tools and the ability to upskill very quickly. Do you think that the boundaries within some organizations will continue to be so rigid between the engineering groups, the data science groups, the infra groups? Or do you think we're moving towards more of a everyone does a bit of everything model?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I think I don't know. Um, I think that's where I am. You know,
Mhm,
I try to make sure I'm willing to say I don't know when I don't know. And this is one where I'm not sure because you know you see you know so let me think of an example. So I see some people you know in the organization who aren't necessarily within our team really taking some initiative, right? Especially with the availability of uh, you know, AI assisted coding and people's just ability to take initiative on that. And
mhm,
the thing I see though is if they really want to do this as a huge part of their job and they're in, say, philanthropy or something, they're going to have a better career path if they would, like, for
mhm,
example, move into our team. Because our team is like you can come as a data scientist and you can grow your
mhm,
career, you know, in a lot of different directions. Whereas when I see more engineering or data science isolated, the question I always wonder is how does the career growth happen there if they
mhm,
want to stay focused on engineering and development? Um, because I think either, you know, you move into a leadership position in finance or philanthropy or whatever division of the organization, and you're not going to be spending much time thinking about engineering
mhm,
or data science in the way you would in IT. So I think that the tools have made it easier, but I wonder a little bit about the career path.
mhm.
All right, everybody. We are 2 minutes from the top of the hour. So I think that we will have to wrap it up and say goodbye to Matt and say thank you so much, Matt, for this amazing conversation. I hope that you had a good time.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you for organizing and moderating. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. And yeah, anyone in here, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or whatever method makes sense because yeah, I'd love to get to know more people who are interested in similar things or encountering similar challenges in this industry. So thank you.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. If you'd like to save the chat, there's three dots in the top of the chat box that you can click and save the chat. But also join the Hangout channel on our Discord server. So pos.it slash Discord. The link is only open for the next few hours. So if you're watching this on Discord later, that link's probably not working, but don't worry about it. Join us and have a really, really good time following up. I have tagged some people in our data science Hangout channel that I know we're all having a similar conversation. We can get there and follow up. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And we will love to see you next week. Next week, we have Isabel Zimmerman and Davis Vaughn, two software engineers from Posit. That work on all kinds of fun things. Isabel works on Positron. Davis does a lot of work with like tidyverse stuff as well. That's super, super fun to ask questions about. So we look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you, Libby. I saw there was a quick question about if these recordings are made available. And I just want to make sure everybody knows that all the Hangouts go up to the Posit YouTube channel. There's a Data Science Hangout playlist, but also on our website, on the Data Science Hangout site too. So you can check it out there.
That's
Thank you
right.
so much.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.